while you're turning to that, we all know, I'm sure, that in the Old Testament, a lot of what we see, what God does with the children of Israel and the things they go through and all that, a lot of stuff, you can look at the sanctuary, the temple, the sacrifices, the furnishings of the temple. They're representative of what was to come. They're representative of, in the natural, what would come in the spiritual. And by looking at a lot of this stuff, we learn a lot of how God is and who God is and how God works and what God expects. If we go back and just briefly, we know that in the Old Testament, a lot of time incense represents prayers ascending before God. We know that a lot of time the oil represents the Spirit of God. So when we look at the Old Testament, a lot of things are representative of what is to come and what God expected out of his people. And we can go to 1 Corinthians, and I believe it's chapter 10, where Paul says, he's talking about the children of Israel and their disobedience and things they did and things they went through. And Paul said there that these things were written for our example, so that we would learn from them, so that we wouldn't fall into the same example, so that we wouldn't make the same blunders and the same mistakes and do things that are not pleasing to God as they did. We're going to go to the book of Numbers and chapter 13, and this is where the children of Israel had come out of Egypt. They had come through the wilderness, and they had got to the border of Canaan. And they were going to go in. You all know the account where the spies went in and things like that. Before we get into all of that, I want to kind of look at something as representative. Egypt was bondage. We were all in bondage. Before Christ came and set us free, we were all in bondage, just like they were in bondage in Egypt. And God brought them out of Egypt. We all know about the Passover, the blood being applied. That represented the blood of Christ, the Lamb who was slain, who came, and the death angel came through, and they were set free out of bondage. When Christ came and saved us, we were set free out of bondage, just like they were set free out of bondage. But they left the bondage and headed toward the promised land. And you can throw in your opinions or whatever you want in here as we go along. But I've heard a lot of songs, and I've heard a lot of sermons, and I've heard a lot of messages that the promised land, Canaan, represented heaven. But I don't think so. Because if you go and you look, when they were going to go into the promised land, they had to run somebody out. I'm not going to have to run nobody out of heaven. I'm not going to have to fight to get into heaven. And when they went into the promised land, they did. And as I said, I've heard all my life in songs and in sermons and in things like that the promised land is heaven. But I don't think it is. I think it's the Christian life. I think it's available, what's available in the Christian life. After we are brought out of bondage, and you can probably identify with this, when you're a servant of Satan, and you give your life to Christ, and he delivers you, and you're saved, Satan don't let go easy. Just like the Egyptians didn't let go easy. They chased them out into the wilderness. Satan will come and try to pull you back. As a young Christian, Satan will put all kind of temptation in front of you. He'll use all kind of ways to try to get you to doubt your salvation and to fall back. And just as the Egyptians came after the children of Israel, God stepped in and God helped them out. And just like us in our Christian life as young Christians, if we will be obedient and we commit ourselves to Christ, he will come in and he will help us. But there's still a period of time where it's pretty rough and hard to get through, and he's after you. But you get to this point in your Christian life, as you grow and as you mature and begin to learn more about God and more of the things of God. And I've often said it, I believe there are like stages in a Christian life. We have to keep growing. We can't just stop here. We have to keep growing, and the more we grow, the more of God we can experience, and the more of the things of God that we can have and can become a part of us. And I believe when we get to a certain point, the promised land here is representative of that. And I'll get more into that as we go through this, but In the book of Numbers, in chapter 13, it begins, verse 1, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them." First thing I want to point out is he said, "which I give." He said it's yours. I'm giving it to you. We as Christians have a lot of promises. And as I was reading this afternoon, I was thinking, we sing that song, "Standing on the Promises." But how many of us really do? There's so many things in here that God has promised us that we don't get, we don't claim, we don't get a hold of. And we've talked about some of these things over time. There is a joy that God has promised us. How many of us have as much joy of God as we really want? How many of us have as much of the peace of God as we really want? How many of us have as much of the power of God as we really want? And there's so many things that God has promised to his children that we don't fully experience. But they're ours. They were given to us. We just have to get them. We just have to get a hold of it. This land was given to them. It was theirs. But they had to go in and possess it. They couldn't do anything with it until they decided to go in and possess it. It's the same with us as Christians. All these promises of God that are in this book for the children of God, you've got to make an effort. You've got to go in and possess them. They've been given to you, but they do you absolutely no good till you go. That land was given to them, but it did them no good until they would go in and claim it. So he said, "which I give unto the children of Israel." Verse 3, "And Moses by the commandment of the Lord sent them from the wilderness of Paran. All those men were heads of the children of Israel." Again, I believe that this is representative of the Christian life. It's representative, the children of Israel, representative of the church. The promises that God has given the church, they have to go in and claim. And God in here, for the children of Israel, he's had to send people to check it out. And I believe, let me back up, he has sent the heads of the children of Israel to check it out. He chose out men who would be those who would go and see what's going on and deliver the message. They were the ones who would get the information. They were the ones who would come up and let everybody know what's going on and what's available to us and all this kind of stuff. He sent the heads in. I believe in the church, that's the people, the preachers and the ministers and the people that God has called to deliver to the church what lies over there that is available to us, what we can have. I believe that's the representation of that. This goes on and it names all these people. I'm not going to read all that. And we'll jump back in at verse 17. It says, "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not, and be ye of good courage, and bring up the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up, searched the land, from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob, as men come to Hamath. They ascended by the south and came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came unto the brook of Eshcol, and cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they bare it between two upon a staff. And they brought of the pomegranates and of the figs. The place was called the brook of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes which the children of Israel cut down from thence. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. They went and they saw what was available. And again, I believe that in our time, in the church world, in the spiritual, that God began through sermons and through teachers and through His Word, He reveals what is available to the children of God. When they went over there and looked, and they saw that there was plenty, there was all these good things. It talks about the grapes. The cluster of grapes was so big, it took 2 men to carry a cluster of grapes. And it talks about there were figs and there were pomegranates. There was all these things that were available to them. Well, when they were over there, they also saw that the sons of the giants were over there. The sons of Anak were the giants, and these people were there too. But what it doesn't mention here we'll see as we go on, that bothered them. That there was something there that could be a hindrance, that there was something there that could be a problem, there was something there that they would have to stand up against, that they would have to put up with. We're going to go on. And they returned from searching the land after 40 days, and they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel under the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, We came unto the land whither thou sent us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Listen, that's the message to the church. God has plenty for his children. God has an abundance for his children. And I'm not talking material things. I'm talking spiritual things that God has for his children. That so much is promised us if we go and we begin to read the promises that God made to his children. I mentioned a few. The joy, the peace, the power, the contentment, everything that God has offered us. We can even go into the fruits of the Spirit. We can go into the gifts of the Spirit. All these things are available to the children of God. It is a land of plenty. If we as the children of God are willing to cross over and go in and partake of this, it is ours. It has been given to us. Just like we started out here where God said he gave them that land. It was theirs. God promised it to them, and it was theirs. And God would see to it that they got it. And they went and they looked at this land. We as children of God, we can look in the Word. We have heard sermons. We know from our years of being Christians about the things of God that we are told that are available to us. How many of us have sat around though and say, why have I never experienced that? Why have I never seen that? Why have I never done that? It's because we have yet to go in and to possess that. A lot of it is we have people who are being told to deliver the message, just like the spies here, which we're going to see and you all already know. A lot of those spies gave a false report or gave a bad report. It wasn't really false. They said what was there, but they didn't put their trust in God. They didn't depend on God. They didn't claim the promise of God. It goes on here, says, and they told him and said, We came into the land whither thou sent us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. It is a good land. There is plenty. It's an amazing place. It is a land of milk and honey, and all this fruit and all these good things. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we, and they brought an evil report of the land. And you know how it goes on from there. There's a lot, I believe, of the church world that is afraid to face what is necessary to face in order to claim that those promises, those things that God has for us, those things that God wants us to have, whether it be we may be afraid of how we're going to look to other people, to other churches, to other Christians, whether it might be I've never seen that, I've never experienced that, I don't know about that. Whatever the case is, if we're going to get the promises of God, there's something that we have to do in order to get them. In order to get these things, they had to be willing to face these giants, the Amalekites and the sons of Anak. They had to be willing to face them. And it looked daunting, and it looked like it was impossible, and it looked like there was no way that they could do it to the 10. But there was the 2. There was Caleb and Joshua who said, we can do it. Because God has promised us this, we can do it. We can cross over and we can have these things. And they are readily available to us. All we got to do is trust God. And I believe that's what we as the church, the children of God today, need to understand. Again, there's things we've heard all of our lives. There's things we've talked about all of our lives. But honestly, how many of the things that you've heard about and you've talked about have you desired to experience, but have yet to experience? What is it that stops us? Here it was the giants, it was the Amalekites and the sons of Anak that stopped them. But in our lives there is something that stops us from going, and they got a little bit. They went in and they got a little bit of the fruit. They brought back that cluster of grapes. They brought back figs, and they brought back pomegranates. And they got a little bit of it. And I believe that's where the church is at. We got a little bit of what it is that God has for it. These people went in and they got that little bit. They saw what more there was, but they stopped because of fear. They stopped because of the obstacles that they would have to overcome to get that. There is, I have to be careful how I say this. God has given me this. There's at least one person here who has begun to experience things of God. And God was using them and was going to continue to use them and continue to give them more than just that little bit of the stuff. There was more to get, there was more to gain, but obstacles had to be overcome. But because sometimes the way people treat us, the way people look at us, the way people do with us, we back off and we stop. People may say things about us, or people may not accept what it is that God would have us to do, or what it is that God would have us to say, and they wouldn't accept that and realize that this is of God. And because things like that happen, we may say, well, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to say that. That's exactly what was going on here. They got a little taste. They brought back a little bit of that fruit. But then when they began to see the obstacle that stood between them and getting the whole thing and getting everything that was promised to them, they stopped. And we do that. And it's weird for me to say things like this, and I got to say it again. And I'm not thinking I am somebody or I'm prophesying or anything like that, so don't get me wrong. But at least one person here has been there and understands what it is that I'm talking about. God began to move, and God began to work, and God was doing something. But for whatever reason, whether it was other people's actions or other people's words or how mistreatment or whatever it was, it stopped. Because we're not willing to face the obstacles and try to overcome them. It looked like something that was too big and too great to overcome. And if we want to experience the fullness of what it is that God has for us, and what it is that's available for us, then we've got to go and overcome the obstacles. And this is the promise that we started out with. Go get what I gave to you. I think I mentioned this morning, half time I don't remember what I said. But God gives us things, and they are ours. But we have to go, and we have to possess them. We have to take a hold of them. We have to claim them. We need to understand that when God speaks it, it is so. But we allow things to stop us from getting what belongs to us, what God has given to us. This was their inheritance. This was their promise. God had told Abraham, I'm going to give this to your descendants. From that point forward, it was theirs. And here when Moses brought them out and brought them to the edge of it, he said, go and get the land which I give you. You know what? They didn't even have to take it. God said, I give it to you. He said, I give it to you. I fully believe if they would have been obedient and done what God said at that first, they would have crossed the river and everybody would have went. I believe that. I might be wrong. I can't back it up with the Bible, but that's what I believe, because God gave that to them. But because of their disobedience, because of the false report, the ones who said we can't overcome these obstacles, they didn't get it. And all those who said we can't do it never got it. They never got a chance. They were turned away and turned back and never got that again. And if you really think about this, that's a scary thing. I want you to remember this. I know I already said it, but I want you to remember this as we're going along. Paul said, all this stuff about the children of Israel was written for our example, so that we wouldn't fall after the same thing and do the same